So very good. So we're continuing on with the laws of Shmita. I don't know why I can't get rid of that. I hope you can hear me and see me.
Yes, we can.
Good. So we're continuing with the laws of Shmita, and we're beginning now to discuss the laws relating to the produce of Shmita and how it relates to us as individuals in using that produce. And we're going to have two main shiurim on this, I believe. The first one today is as follows. The Torah says, Vahisa Shabbos ha'aretz lachem la'achla, and it will be a Shabbos for the land, for you to eat. In other words, the Torah specifically says that the produce of the Shemitah year is for us to eat. And from here, the rabbis make two inferences. When it says to eat, it means to eat and not to spoil or destroy. And when it says to eat, it means to eat and not to deal, not to trade in it. So the first matter is to eat and not to destroy, like Hef said, a destruction or a spoiling of it. And that will govern the rules relating to how we as individuals can treat the produce of the Shemitah year, which has Kedusha Shemitah. So first of all, let's define once again the produce of the Shemitah year, which has Kedusha. And when I say fruit in general, I will mean all kinds of produce, unless I specify fruit of the trees. Okay, so in general now, the produce of the Shemitah year we are allowed to eat for ourselves and for our animals. And not only that we are allowed to eat, we are also allowed to drink, and we are also allowed to use it for the normal way that that produce is used. It may be that it's an oil that we use for anointing, so then we can use that oil for anointing. It may be oil that we use for lighting, so we can use it for lighting. It may be produce that is used for dyeing, so we can dye it. In other words, the use of the produce of Shemitah must be specific for that which is normally used. What is the produce of Shemitah? So we've already discussed this, but I just once again want to define it because this will affect us very much. It is that which is grown in the Shemitah year, and that is decided according to what kind of produce it is. 3 different kinds. Vegetation is defined as Shemitah produce if it's picked during the Shemitah year. Legumes, kidneys, and grains, and olives and wine are defined as produce of the Shemitah year if 1/3 of their growth occurs in the Shemitah year. If 1/3 of their growth occurred before the Shemitah year, so they're not within the Shemitah year. It's interesting that that's talking about legumes, kidneys, and grain, wheat and the like, barley, etc. And it adds olives and grapes. In general, the fruit of trees has a different rule. And the Shmita, whether it's in the Shemitah or not, depends on what's called Hanata, when the flower drops off the plant and you begin to see the bud. Anyone who watches or sees fruit trees will know that usually in the springtime there are flowers, and then at one point the flowers drop off and you can see the bud. If that happens in the Shemitah year, it's Shemitah produce. If not, not. Now, for example, nearly all the fruit that you can buy in the shops now and is growing on trees, the Hanata was last year, or this current year that we're in until Rosh Hashanah. So therefore that fruit will not have Kedusha Shvius, but any fruit that grows in the coming year, that is grown in the coming year, that's to say that point where the flowers drop off and the buds begin to grow, will be the produce of Shemitah year, even though it won't be fully grown and in the shuk in the markets or in the shops until the 8th year. Nevertheless, it will have Kedusha Shvius. Okay. So now the question is, what, and we've said before, and I have to repeat it, what about produce that's grown by Arabs, cultivated by Arabs in land which is in possession of Arabs? So we said before that that's a difference of opinion. Some say it does not have Kedusha Shvi. That was the old Yerushalmi position. Some says it does. That was the Vinegar position of the Chazon Ish and the other poskim in Bnei Brak. And today that view is much more general. And I'm going to assume, for the purpose of this class, that we're going to hold that Arab produce which you can buy in the way that we will specify next time has Kedusha Shvius. Now, what about produce that is grown not in this way? For example, most people do not hold by the Heter Mechila. That's to say, they do not hold today that there's an agreement, a general agreement with the government or the Rabbanut, with the Arabs, that we sell them the topsoil, and therefore it's not applicable Shmita, even though all the work is done by Jews. They plant, they harvest, they sell, etc. So if we hold that that is not effective to remove the law of Shmita, it would mean that the produce that is grown, let's say in the majority of agriculture in Israel, relying on the Heter Shmita, means that that produce has Kedusha, because we don't hold that the Heter Mechila can remove the Kedusha. It doesn't mean that the produce is treif or unkosher or cannot be eaten. On the contrary, there is Kedusha in that produce, even though it was grown by Isa, by things which are forbidden, and it was marketed by Isa. The fruit itself has Kedusha. There's a very interesting question. For example, last Shmita year, 7 years ago, there was the local Makolet, the local store, must have bought or had delivered by mistake, let's say, a crate of wine that was not done through Otza based in or any permitted way. It was done through Heter Mechila. That's to say that there's a Heter Mechila. You have to be careful when you buy wine which is from the Shmita year, according to what we've said about grapes. A seventh of it, a third of it was grown in the Shmita year. So that has Kedusha. And if we don't hold that the Heter Mechila is valid to remove the Kedusha, the produce has Kedusha, shouldn't be sold, but it was sold. So what's the law relating to that? If it has Kedusha Shmita, it means it must be treated with Kedusha Shmita, even though it was traded through Heter Mechila. Someone brings you a bottle of wine, which is Heter Mechila. They didn't look at the label properly. Or as I say, the store had all these bottles which they put outside because they don't want to sell them. So in my opinion, that produce has Kedusha Shmita, and therefore it must be treated with Kedusha Shmita if it comes into your possession. And you're not allowed to say, well, this is treif, this is not kosher, and throw it away, because that's destroying it, as we come to in a moment. And on the contrary, if it's in your possession, even though you didn't buy it and you didn't intend it came into your possession, but somehow it comes into your possession, it has to be treated with Kedusha Shmita. Okay, so what are the principal laws and rules which affect us relating to the treatment of produce which has Kedusha Shmita? As I said, the law says you can eat it, and we learn that means you can eat it, but you can't destroy it or cause it to get destroyed or lost. So we have a number of rules. The first question is, it's very important. We said that the Shmita law is a mitzvah aseh. We have to keep the Shmita. Does that mean we have to eat produce that comes from the Shmita law? Let's say wine or fruit which Does that mean we have to go out of our way to buy fruit from oats based in, or which means I'm allowed to acquire it and it has kedusha? Well, no, I don't have to buy that wine. I can buy imported wine. I don't have to buy fruit that's from kedusha Shmita from Eretz Yisrael. I can buy imported fruit. So we seem to hold the halacha like the Chazon Ish. There is no mitzvah, there is no obligation, I should say, that there is no obligation to eat produce which has kedusha Shmita. When we learn about mitzvahs, there is a distinction between that which has an obligation and that which doesn't have an obligation. We call it a reshut, permission. But if the person does it, excuse me, just have to turn my phone off. Sorry, I left my phone on by mistake. I was talking about the distinction between an obligation and what's called a reshut. The classic example is tefillin. There was an obligation to put on tefillin. Tzitzis, there's no obligation to wear a talit. If you wear a four-cornered garment, you have to have tzitzit on it, but there's no obligation to do it. So there are those mitzvahs which we are obliged to do, and those mitzvahs which we are not obliged to do, but if we do them, we're doing a mitzvah. In other words, when I put on my talis, I say a bracha, and I'm doing the mitzvah, but I don't have an obligation to do it. And in my opinion, kedusha Shmita is the same thing. I have no obligation to eat that fruit. I don't have to run around looking for it. But if I do eat that fruit, I could say there is a kiyum. That means I am performing the mitzvah of Shmita. So that's very important. That is something. So according to that view, although we don't have any obligation to eat produce, to drink produce, if we do, there is a mitzvah because we're participating in the mitzvah of the kedusha. Okay. So the general rule is that produce which has kedusha shvius, you have to do it in the normal way. If it's normally eaten raw, you're supposed to eat it raw. You're not supposed to cook it. If it's normally cooked, you're supposed to eat it cooked, and you're not supposed to eat it raw. The normal way. So what is the normal way? That's a very important question, which is affected, in my opinion, by the times and by the place, and to a certain extent by the person. For example, my book says, as an example of things which are eaten cooked, is kishuim, zucchini. So, according perhaps to the majority of people, zucchini are cooked. What happens there nowadays? People who eat it raw, they cut it up and they put it in salad. Are we allowed to do that, or does it come within the general category that since it's normally cooked, we have to eat it cooked and we're not allowed to eat it raw? Very interesting, important question, particularly these days that more and more people are eating what is called healthy food or raw food or whatever, and therefore a substantial number of people today would eat raw zucchini. However, let's say the majority of people don't eat raw zucchini, they only eat it cooked. So if I belong to the minority of people who like raw zucchini in my salad, am I allowed to eat raw zucchini or no? I have to go according to the majority who eat it cooked. Now let me give, for example, my wife has a machine, kind of a device where you put the zucchini in one end and you turn it round, and it turns zucchini into like spaghetti. It makes it long strips. So is she allowed to do that? So I would say that certainly is not the normal way of eating zucchini. Not many people turn their zucchini into like spaghetti kind of strips. So that we wouldn't allow to do. What about eating it raw? So do we say, well, we go after the majority of people, and we don't know, but let's assume the majority of people eat it cooked. You can't eat it raw. Or no, since a substantial number of people do eat it raw, then I can put myself in that group and eat it raw. This will depend on the judgment of your rabbi, you should ask. And I'm not going to tell people what to do. However, if that person is accustomed to eating it both raw and cooked, and that's a normal, acceptable way of eating today, I would tend to say that therefore that person could eat it raw and cooked. What about blending? Is blending the normal way of eating? Well, blending is not the normal way of eating for most people, so that it may be that we're not allowed to blend. However, if someone is in practice always blending certain food, perhaps it may be an exception. That person would be allowed to do it. So difficult questions, where to draw the line. However, the more that one does in order to keep the mitzvah of Shmita, I would say that's praiseworthy. So therefore, without going overboard, if we take upon ourselves and say, look, well, it's a Shmita year for 1 year, I don't have to blend it, I can eat it without blending, then perhaps it would be good not to blend it, because by doing that, we know that we are keeping the Shmita law. So this is a very difficult question that each person has to decide. What about peels? If the fruit is normally peeled, so of course you should peel it. And what about if it's not normally peeled? The famous line, Beulah, peel me a grape. So if, for example, someone wants to peel grapes, that's not normal, and therefore shouldn't be done. And if it's done, then we'll have to see what you have to do with the peels. My book again gives an example of tomatoes. Tomatoes are not normally peeled, therefore you shouldn't peel tomatoes. Of course, in some kind of gourmet cooking, when the tomatoes are cooked, you can cook tomatoes in stews, etc. Some people boil them first and peel them to get rid of the peels. Can we do that in the Shmita year? Well, no, since tomatoes are normally not peeled, we can't peel them. So those are difficult questions, and they should be answered by your particular rabbi. And according to whether we think that we should, the stricter the better, or no, we have to accommodate people. And since the fruit is to be eaten, and there is, according to what I said, a kiyum mitzvah, someone is doing a mitzvah by eating it, we shouldn't refrain from doing it the normal way we do it, even though the majority of people do not do it. Okay. Fruit which can be eaten raw or cooked, like apples. Apples people normally eat raw, but also they cook apples. Cooked apples is a very common dish. So they certainly can be used in both ways. What about wine? Shmita wine. Well, we drink wine. Of course, we can drink it. Can we cook with it? So people do cook with wine. So therefore, it seems that you can mix wine with things that are cooked. And also you can pour, if you normally don't drink wine full strength and you like to dilute it with water. So the poskim, the rabbis say that you can dilute it with water because that's a normal way of using it. Interesting side law. Normally, you're not supposed to overeat. It's called a chilakas. It's not pleasant just to stuff yourself with food that you don't need. But in Shmita, that becomes an issa. You're not allowed to do it. because you have to eat the food with kedusha, with enjoyment and pleasure, and you know that you're eating in order to be healthy and to serve Hashem, all the positive reasons. So gluttony, just sticking food down the mouth, is no longer a way of eating the food with kedusha, and therefore should not be done. If you normally make jam or jelly with food, you can do that too. But you should do it the way that you normally do. Now, if food is cooked in a way which is not normally done, raw food is cooked. So what do you do with that? Well, the cooking of it doesn't take away the kedusha. You're not supposed to do it, but if once it's cooked, the food is not forbidden. You can't throw it away because that's destroying it. So if someone cooks food which is not normally cooked, even though we said he shouldn't do that or she shouldn't do that, that's not the normal way. If it's done, the food just has to be, and that's coming back now to what I said about the wine. Someone gives you wine which comes from hetemachira. You're not allowed to throw it away. On the contrary, we say that hetemachira did not remove the kedusha, so therefore it still has kedusha, and therefore treated properly. What does it mean, treated properly? Well, there's certain rules relating to what. But I'm not allowed to pour more than I can drink in the cup, so that part of it flows over and is then used to put out the light, which we do generally. So in Havdalah, if you want to do that, so you mustn't use Kedusha Shmita wine, or if you use Kedusha Shmita wine, you should not put out the candle, the light, in the wine. I mean, you're still making Havdalah if you don't do that. That's the normal way we do it. But if it's Shmita wine, you're not allowed to do that because that spoils the wine. And also, you shouldn't pour out wine in a glass so that overflows and goes to waste. If you pour out a good glass of wine in a saucer and there's some wine left in the saucer, then you have to drink it because you're not allowed, as I say, to destroy things. You're allowed to make things which start off as liquid for food, like making ice cream, etc. Some people say you shouldn't do that, but in general, we say you're allowed to do it. What about the taste? Let's say that when we learn the laws of food, which is forbidden and permitted, we have a lot of concern with what's called taste. Is the taste like the food itself? So therefore, let's say you're making some soup and you put in all vegetables which have Kedusha Shmita. Shmita, let's say you bought from the Arabs and behold, you got them from the Arabs and that has Kedusha. So you put all the vegetables in, you make a nice vegetable soup, and then you take the vegetables out. So you're only left with liquid. And that liquid doesn't have the food itself, but it has the taste of the food. The taste of the food has gone into the liquid, into the soup. So even if I took all the fruit, all the vegetables out, I should nevertheless use the dish that has the taste of the Shmita vegetables as Kedusha Shvias. Because taste, there's a question, is taste something? So we're saying for this law, taste is something. So the taste of Shmita is like the Kedusha of Shmita. Okay, so let me just say a word or two about this question of Kedusha. We said that there is Kedusha. Is the Kedusha come because it's the produce of Eretz Yisrael in the Shemitah year, in the three definitions that we've made? Or is it because a Jew has worked the land? If a Jew doesn't work the land, he doesn't have Kedusha. Is it because it comes from the seventh year? Or is it because it comes from the land of the seventh year? Let's say we discussed before that you have fruit which is grown in an atzitz, which is a pot, a container. Is that considered the produce of the land? There's a whole question in the Gemara of a vessel which has a hole in it. Is that considered connected to the ground? If it stands on the ground, yes. What happens if it's on pegs and there's a hole in it? So we say if it gets nourishment from the ground, it's considered still to be a produce of the land. And that depends on the pot that it's in. If it's earthenware, we say earthenware draws nourishment even though there's no hole in it. If it's metal, perhaps not. It only draws nourishment if there's a hole in it. And the Gemara has a very interesting question, a comparison between where there's a separation of air between the plant and the ground. For example, a plant is on pegs, and then it's put on the ground. Is that called planting for the law of Shabbos? Or no, it was already planted when it was on the pegs. And the contrary, if he picks it up from the ground and he puts it on pegs, is that called harvesting, removing the plant from its growth by putting it on pegs? And the question there is determined about whether there's a hole or whether it draws nourishment. And there's a very interesting question, which I'm not going to go into, but I'd say over the side. What about water? Let's say a plant is growing in a boat in the rivers of Eretz Yisrael. Is that considered growing in the land of Eretz Yisrael for all the laws of Truma and Maisa? Or no, because the water is a separation. So we're involved in the separation. So now let's say there's no doubt about separation. I'm growing some cucumbers on the 10th floor. I live on the 10th floor of a building, and I'm growing it in a metal pot on a table with sheets of metal separating it from the ground. There's no question at all that that does not have the laws of Shmita. That's not subject to the laws of Shmita. Does it have Kedusha? No, it doesn't have Kedusha, we would say, because Kedusha is the produce of that which grows from the ground. But if it grows from the ground, so then it will have Kedusha. And what is the effect of Kedusha? So we said there are a couple of things. One is that it should be eaten or used in its normal way. It shouldn't be used in an unusual way. Why? Because it's permitted for what's called a chila, or for the normal use. And once you take yourself outside of the normal use, it's already something which we shouldn't do. But it still has Kedusha. So what? So now that will affect what will I do if I don't eat it all? Let's say it's stuff which is normally peeled, oranges. We peel oranges. Vegetables, potatoes, we peel potatoes. We're going to cook the potatoes. What do I do with the peels? We're going to eat the orange. Maybe we can also squeeze the orange, because that's a normal way of using orange, which is squeezing it. And there was questions about this in the past, but I would say today squeezing oranges is a normal permitted use of oranges. But what do I do with the peel? The peel, even though it's not normally eaten, may have Kedusha, because it's the produce of the land during the Shmita year. So what we normally do is that we do not throw the peel away. It has to be treated in a special way, because things which have Kedusha, sanctity, has to be treated with respect. Anything which has Kedusha, tefillin, things that are written in Hebrew, which have the subject of Torah, they have to be treated in a special way. So what do I do with these peels? So I shouldn't throw them away. What about throwing them in the garbage? Is that considered throwing them away? So normally we would say that you shouldn't throw the peels, etc., or that which you don't eat, the cores, etc., straight into the garbage. You should keep them separate until they decompose and are no longer considered edible. I mean, we don't normally eat them anyway, but they could be. I don't know about potato peels, but orange peels you can cook with and you could eat them. But you're not allowed to throw them away. And even the potato peels, you shouldn't throw away because they could be eaten by animals until they become spoiled of themselves and are not fit for use. So they should be kept separately in a special garbage container or in special bags until they decompose. Once they decompose, you can throw them into the garbage. And you shouldn't mix in your special container things which are nearly decomposed and things which are just beginning to be put away. For example, you peel stuff, you shouldn't put it in a container where you already have the stuff that was there pretty well a week ago and it's decomposed. Now, there are people who are very fussy and they don't like the idea that you have in your kitchen or in your house different containers containing food which is in the process of decomposition. So if someone really finds they can't do this, they should be very careful, put them in a plastic bag, tie up the plastic bag, and then in those circumstances, perhaps they could put them in the garbage. Some people would say on the top of the garbage, separate from the normal. Okay, so now therefore that's dealing with peels. And this is also true of leftover food. If I have food, I make a salad or something or vegetables and I don't eat it all, I should not just throw what I don't eat away. The same thing, I should put it in separate containers or bags until it decomposes and then I can get rid of it because it still has the kedusha. Okay? What happens though, let's say I cook potatoes in water and the potatoes are boiled, I remove them. What about the water that I boiled the potatoes in? So I said before that if it has the taste, so then it has kedusha. If I make a soup, vegetable soup, and I remove the vegetables, then the soup has kedusha. It's in water. So since I don't normally use the water, unless people use it for stock, but if I don't normally use stock, or I'm not strict about making stock, so then the water that I boil the potatoes in, I only use the water for boiling the potatoes. I'm not interested in the water, and therefore that water does not have kedusha shmit, and I can throw it away. We've said before that you shouldn't squeeze fruit that we don't normally squeeze. For example, figs, pears, onions, cucumbers, stuff like that. Most people don't squeeze them. So if you have people who do, I suppose you can get some bit of fruit out of some pears, or you can get some liquid out of vegetables of some kind. You shouldn't do that. But you can pickle things that are normally pickled. Onions are normally pickled. I think you could pickle onions. Cucumbers are pickled cucumbers. So those you can pickle, and also fruit that is normally squeezed to make juice, like grapes. People grape juice, apart from wine, you squeeze grapes, you squeeze lemons, squeeze oranges, squeeze grapefruits. So that kind of fruit you are allowed to squeeze. That's not considered a change. That's the normal way of eating it or drinking it, and we're allowed to do it. And therefore that juice has itself kedusha. So you're not allowed to throw it away. You squeeze an orange and you only want to drink half of it. What are you going to do with the rest of the orange juice? You should not throw it away. You should put it aside, keep it in the fridge, and drink it next time you want some orange juice. And again, I said because, and now again, even if someone squeezes stuff that's not normally squeezed, I shouldn't do it, but the produce that comes out of it has kedusha and it has to be treated with kedushas. And then we come to mashing. So normally you're only supposed to mash fruit that you usually mash. But for a kid, even if you don't, if a normal person, let's say, let's say you don't normally smash peas. You eat whole peas. But if you're doing it for a kid, for a baby, so then you're allowed to smash it, to break it up, or to whatever is necessary to do for a child, and you can do it for a child. I said before you can peel, but he says, as I said, that he's not usually, you're not supposed to peel things that you don't normally peel. Apricots you don't normally peel. Tomatoes, he says, you don't normally peel. What about things that are rotten? You sometimes get fruit or even vegetables which have a part which is rotten. So you can remove that part which is rotten. And even though, you know, we're not perfect creatures, so if I cut off the part that's rotten, there's going to be a little bit that I could eat with it attached to it. That doesn't matter. I'm still allowed to do that, and therefore I can throw them away. And lettuce, for example, you peel off the bad lettuce. Sometimes you peel off some good lettuce with it that you could eat. Doesn't matter. If your purpose is to remove the bad, that's all right. But as I say, all these peels and the grain and the seeds, after I eat the fruit, there's seeds inside, so that has kedusha Shmita. He said, orange peel, some people are strict, because you can use them, you can feed them to animals, and you can fry them, etc., or put them with sugar and honey. So some people say that the peels also has kedusha. You're not supposed to use wine to anoint yourself or anything other than the normal use of it. I knew people, someone who used to, and also olive oil, knew someone who used to use olive oil on the head to as a kind of not a shampoo, but as like a hair grease or something. But that's not normal. You shouldn't do that. What about oil that you use to fry with? So if you're going to use oil not only to fry with it, but also to give it a taste to the dish, a lot of dishes which are fried in oil, the oil remains, there's oil remaining that gives taste to it, that you can do. But if you only use the oil so the food won't stick to the pot, but you're not using the oil for taste, a very little oil, maybe one of those little spray oils, or you just put it on with a Shmita or something, just the minimum oil so that the food won't stick to the pot, but not that you want the oil itself, so that you shouldn't do on Shemitah oil. Because again, you're not using it for food, you're using it for lubrication of the pot, which is not for food. We have to use it for food. You also, so it follows from that you're not allowed to use Shmita produce for cleaning. Lots of people use the lemon, right? The squeezed lemon on the dishes, or you get commercial cleaning material that has lemon in it or other fruit. You're not allowed to use that for cleaning. Lemon juice can be used for drinking, for flavoring the food, but not for cleaning purposes. What about tobacco? I don't know if there is a tobacco that's grown in Eretz Yisrael, but assuming there is, so then that has Kedusha Shviz. But you can smell it and you can smoke it because that's the normal way of using it. But you shouldn't use it. You have to be careful, of course, that it wasn't picked during the Shemitah year. And you have to use it in the normal way and what's left over. Now, what about, you see, if you're smoking tobacco and then there's the ashes of the cigarette, what about that? So the answer is, since he got benefit of the smoking in the normal way, so there's no Kedusha in the ashes. What about herbs and fragrances and perfumes? So they also have Kedushas, Shmiya. And so when you take, let's say on Motzi Shabbos, again by the time of Havdalah, so I have a lemon tree outside. So can I pick, and they have it doesn't produce lemons, but it has a beautiful fragrance. So can I use the lemon leaves for the Havdalah, for the bracha on the summit? So I say I can do that, but after I've smelled them, I shouldn't throw them away as long as it still has fragrance. Since the essence of the leaf is fragrance, all the time that it has fragrance, there's even Kedusha in the fragrance. It's interesting. See, if someone is so sensitive that he or she feels when she's eating the produce of Shmita, and actually or claims to feel the Kedusha, so that would also be true of the fragrance. Someone goes and smells the fragrance of a rose tree and Shmita, that's that's the mitzvah of Shmita, the positive mitzvah. What about people put mint in tea? Are you allowed to do that? Well, you can use that the same way, but I think you have to be careful. After the tea, you take the leaves out. You've got to be careful. You can't just throw them away if they would still have fragrance. And when we say that I'm not allowed to destroy the produce of Shmita, that is true even if it's not normally eaten by man, but it's animal food. As the Torah specifically says, it's for the animal. But if it is food that is suitable for man, you shouldn't give it to an animal. Many people who own pets give the animals the leftovers from their plate. Now, if that is leftover produce of Shmita, it shouldn't be done. It shouldn't be given to an animal. Food which is normally eaten by a person should not be used as animal food. Very important that people, as I say, I remember someone said she cooked cucumbers for her, I think it was a cat, I can't remember if it was a cat or a dog, but this cat or dog was fed on a diet of cooked cucumbers. So I said, well, you can't do that. You have to make sure that the cucumbers you get don't have Kedusha. You buy them from Chutzlaritz or some other way, but you're not supposed to use human food which has Kedusha Shmita for animal food. What about, now in Sukkot, people like to hang the etrog, not the etrog, they're shaking, let's say, another etrog. They like to hang that up on a sukkah, in sukkah. Am I allowed to do that? Well, since I'm not spoiling it, and after sukkah I can use it, so then that would be permitted, because while I'm putting it in the sukkah, it doesn't take away the fact that it's still food after sukkah. I could still eat it. Interesting, for example, now in Pesach and the Seder night. So I'm using, let's say I'm using Kedushas wine which has Kedushas Shmita. So now when I come to the 10 plagues, when they say that tzach, etc., you stick your finger into the wine, you flick it out. You shouldn't do that if the wine has Kedushas Shmita. Because by flicking it out, you're like destroying it and you're spoiling the wine. I said that you can use oil of Shmita to light with, but Hanukkah is a special rule. When normally I light candles with oil, I'm doing it to see for the light. I get benefit from the light. So therefore I'm using it because I get benefit. But Hanukkah, we have a special law that you're not allowed to get benefit. You're not allowed to have benefit from the Hanukkah lights. You have to see them and remember the miracle, but you're not allowed, the Gemara talks about counting money, but you're not allowed to read by a Hanukkah light. You have to have another light in the wall. And therefore, because I'm not allowed in Hanukkah to get benefit from the oil. So therefore, since I'm not getting benefit from the Hanukkah light, I'm not allowed to light a Hanukkah light with the oil which has Kedusha Shmita. A few more little detailed laws. But I can use it for Shabbos because I'm getting benefit from it. But I shouldn't use, if I'm not really using it for benefit, let's say a Ner Neshama, so people like to light on the anniversary on the Yud side. So if you buy a candle, so that's all right, but some people might burn oil, so you shouldn't burn oil for that, because again, you're not getting benefit from it. It's not for benefit, it's for remembrance. So all those things that are not for the benefit, you shouldn't use Shmita produce. You shouldn't, very important, you shouldn't give the Paris, the fruit of Shmita produce to a non-Jew. If a non-Jew comes to your house, you're allowed to feed it to him, but you shouldn't give it to him. So that, let's go back to my case of the bottles of wine, which were Etem Achira, which I said, let's say, has Kedusha Shmita, and the guy and the Makolet bought it, he doesn't know what to do with it, or someone brought it to your house and gave it to you and you didn't notice till he left. You did notice it was Shmita. You're not supposed to give it to a non-Jew. because again, there's the Kedusha, the relationship between the Kedusha and the Jew. So if the non-Jew comes to the house, you can give it to him, you can serve him as part of what you're serving yourself, but you shouldn't think, well, that's a way of getting rid of this produce which I'm not supposed to have, and I'll give it to a non-Jew. You're not supposed to do that. You shouldn't plant the Shmita produce. Very interesting. Let's say there's some, not just the seeds, let's say there's some produce which you plant the whole plant, the whole fruit. I think some people, onions, for example, or garlic. One of the ways of growing onions and garlic is to plant an old onion, an onion plant which is sprouting, or a garlic which is sprouting. If that onion or that garlic had Kedusha Shmita, you shouldn't plant it, because by planting it, you are, in a sense, destroying it. You shouldn't, and this is very interesting. I would have thought, well, since you're allowed to eat it and drink it and anoint yourself with it, and if it's for lighting, you can light with it. If it's for dying, you can die with it. You should also be able to use it for healing. The answer is no. You shouldn't use it to rub on your body or to use it for healing, because in that way we're destroying it. What about people like to gargle with vinegar, right? So you got a sore throat. So sore throat, you want to gargle your throat, and you have with vinegar. The only vinegar you have is Shmita vinegar. Can you use that Shmita vinegar to gargle with? That depends. You can gargle with it if you swallow it, because then you're drinking it. But you can't gargle with it and spit it out, because then it's destroying it. But fruit and produce which is specifically for animals, and you can use it for medicinal, so that you can do.
So vegetables that grow in my garden.
I can't hear you, what?
Vegetables that grow in my garden, I can
Yes.
eat speaking.
Your garden which is in the earth, not your garden which is up on top. Your garden in the earth, yeah. What about it?
I can eat the produce which grows there during Shmita.
That's a question of speaking.
Right.
We make a rule that vegetables, we said this before, but I'll say it again. From the Torah, if you have vegetables growing in your garden, you're allowed to eat them. You're not allowed to sell them, but you can pick enough to eat for a meal or so. But the rabbis say, wait a minute, we have a problem. There will be farmers who are not totally trustworthy, who will say that they didn't plant the vegetables, they grew them on themselves, and therefore they picked them, and therefore they can use them. The answer is no. We make a rule from the rabbis that you're not allowed to pick and eat vegetables that grow in the Shmita year. Even though you're not going to trade them, even though they're in your garden, they're called svichim, and you're not allowed to use them. So the answer would be, unless they were up on a higher floor and separated with all the way we've discussed it before, vegetables that grow in the garden, you're not allowed to pick and eat. Shmita from the rabbis, that's called svichim.
So how do you tell me that we can eat vegetables from the Shmita year that have Kedusha Shmita? Is that not for speaking?
If they are grown by an Arab in Arab land, the Arab is allowed to pick them. The law that you're not allowed to pick the fruit applies to Jews, not to Arabs. So if an Arab grows vegetables, and I hold that has Kedusha Shmita, so I will come next week to tell you how you can acquire it. You're not allowed to buy it specifically by weight, but you can buy it if you by estimation with other produce, etc. So if it were to have our vegetables which have kedusha but do not have this isa, so then you have to eat it. Okay? That is the main heter for eating vegetables that are grown by Arabs. And as I said before, the Jerusalem rabbis held that it doesn't have Shmita, so none of what I've been talking about today applies. Vinegar says it does have Shmita, a kedusha, so therefore that will affect what you can do with it, and it will also affect how you can acquire it, which will be the subject of next week's class. So in summary, that food which has kedusha shmita, which I'm allowed to eat or drink in the normal way, I have to do it in the normal way, and I have to treat it with respect, including the waste produce, etc., etc. If it doesn't have kedusha shmita, then there's no problem. But if it does have kedusha shmita and it comes into my possession in a legal way, I have to treat it. And even if it comes into my possession in a non-legal way, and he goes to a supermarket and he buys Shmita produce, which he shouldn't do, but the fact that he bought it doesn't remove the kedusha. So therefore, it comes into his possession. He has to treat it with kedusha. Okay. Any questions? If you have questions, let me know, and I'll try to answer them by next week. Have a good day, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much.